Last year I read a paper that was sent to me that focused on the legacy of Māori benefit receipt and the contribution of the welfare state to what they called this unprecedented dependency. I can't remember who the author was, but did a sort of circulation round, on the email system. While there were many aspects of this paper that I could agree with, I felt that essentially it lacked a much broader analysis of the political economy. It did not even begin to analyse the root cause that underpinned the level of benefit passivity that I perceived among some of our youth. In short, the paper failed to define the collective problem to be solved. Similar to other analyses that focuses on the subjects of long-term benefit receipt, the paper overlooked the context that produced the human experience under scrutiny. Unable to resolve the issue of so-called Māori benefit receipt, it collapsed back onto its subject, where individual pathology or effect become a shallow proxy for cause. I remain concerned that at a macro policy level, where welfare reform is under consideration, that we have yet to articulate the problem to be addressed. As a society, demographically, we are top-heavy with an ageing population, and we just heard a woman speaking about that. This is also, however, a group that has been nurtured on a diet of self-entitlement, who will be leaving the workforce and sliding most neatly onto equally self-deserving pensions. Is this a long-term benefit receipt that we've come to solve? Or is it that other part of the demographic, the undeserving and the unentitled? This is also that group less likely to be consumers of our already overburdened health dollars. They're less likely to consume scarce education resources. And as evidence suggests, they're also less likely to access social services. Is this perhaps a problem that welfare reform will address? Reforms that will provide for a fairer distribution of resources, where criteria is targeted and designed to effect long-term change in an effort to stimulate the economy. Is this what welfare reform is about? In order to understand the problem for which it seems welfare reform is assumed to be the answer, let us now consider the following question. What sort of society do we want? And what are some of the factors required to achieve this society? Effective welfare reform should be able to articulate a collective vision of where we're heading. It must also be broad enough to express the core values of democracy, so that it must also seek to address structural inequalities. And some of those structural inequalities that we've heard about earlier are about income distribution, income inequality, the education system, the health system, the tax system, all those things. Because merely tinkering on the periphery of welfare reform is something else altogether. And from memory, I think that's called benefit cuts. The effect may well be that we reduce long-term benefit receipt, but surely the drivers have to be about what type of society we want. And if this is the case, then it must be how we grow human capital to produce that type of society. Imbued with a collective vision and agreement on the problem to be addressed, welfare reform can actually stimulate the economies in ways we have yet to achieve. The untapped wealth representative of successive generations of Māori human capital is a rather poignant example. Reform should be about radical overhaul of those structures in which human experience is fostered to have an enduring belief in their potential to contribute and influence society. Welfare reform is, of course, essentially about the big picture. It must be future focused and it must have a buoyant workforce to sustain it. It absolutely has to be about producing an engaged labour market that is robust and relevant. It cannot be about locking our youth into sunset industries that are not sustainable. Welfare reform has to be about imagining our ideal society and reconfirming a belief in ourselves and in the capacity of our youth to achieve much more than we might assume. So what might be the cause of benefit receipt among groups such as Māori? To answer this question, we need to also consider what it is that makes some groups more successful than others and capable of generating wealth. Research shows that lifelong learning and a belief in oneself is fundamental to human experience, as is diet, identity, and a general sense of belonging. Add this to over a decade of funded compulsory education, and what we have is an individual equipped to be able to make informed choices. There are, of course, many variations in this picture that are actually beyond reforms, such as what we're dealing with today. At a minimum, however, for me anyway, any area that has a substantial investment of tax dollars is certainly within the realm of influence. And unless you subscribe to the spurious notion that some groups have less intellectual ability than others, then you may well suspect, as I do, that Māori children are just not being educated to the same level as everybody else. For too long, too many Māori have been leaving school and seeking employment with few or no qualifications at all. Despite this, relative to the OECD mean, evidence suggests that Māori students perform better on average in mathematical literacy. However, across the other domains of literacy, such as scientific literacy, Māori students don't do as well. And that is a real issue, as school leavers with lower literacy have poorer prospects at employment. When, where, and how one enters the labour market is possibly the most reliable indicator of future benefit receipt among particular groups.